The societal narrative about aging is a pernicious lie. It tells you that decline is inevitable, that dependency is your destiny. But what if self-neglect, not aging itself, is the real villain? Most men your age surrender their autonomy daily, not to time but to their own abandoned responsibility. The consequences are severe: diminished dignity, fractured relationships, and wasted potential. The 8 essential self-care practices I'm about to share aren't mere suggestions, they're weapons against unnecessary suffering. Humans require maintenance at every stage of life. This isn't optional, it's fundamental. The choice is stark. Take control of your care or watch your sovereignty erode. Subscribe now if you're ready to reclaim what's rightfully yours. The hierarchies of aging are brutal and unforgiving. They don't care about your feelings or your past accomplishments. They care only about how seriously you take the responsibility of maintaining your physical vessel. I've counseled countless men who believed their bodies would somehow continue functioning without proper attention. This is dangerously naive. Your physical discipline is not optional. It's the foundation upon which everything else in your later years will stand or crumble. Start with movement. Not intense, punishing routines designed for younger men, but consistent, deliberate physical engagement that respects your current limitations while refusing to surrender to them. 20 minutes of daily walking creates more transformation than sporadic, ambitious efforts that leave you injured and demoralized. The body is designed to move, and when it stops moving regularly, it begins the process of shutting down, not immediately, but incrementally, day by day. I'm curious, at what age did you first notice your body sending signals that things were changing? Share that moment in the comments. The conversation around physical decline often lacks honesty, and your experience matters. The second pillar is nutritional hierarchy. Modern dietary advice is a cacophony of contradictory noise, but certain principles remain immutable. Protein becomes increasingly crucial as you age. Muscle tissue requires it to maintain integrity against the constant pressure of sarcopenia. Processed foods introduce chaos into aging biological systems. They're not merely unhelpful, they're actively undermining your capacity to function autonomously. This isn't about longevity for its own sake, it's about sovereignty. Each meal represents a choice, either toward dependency or toward maintained autonomy. The nutrition that sustained you at 40 is insufficient at 70. Your body's ability to extract nutrients diminishes. This requires not just awareness but adaptation. Hydration, often overlooked, becomes paramount. Cellular function deteriorates without adequate fluid intake, affecting everything from cognitive clarity to joint mobility. What I'm describing isn't a path to immortality, it's a path to dignity. Physical discipline isn't separate from psychological well-being, it's its prerequisite. When you establish sovereignty over your physical routine, you're simultaneously building psychological resilience. The commitment to move your body daily despite discomfort, to fuel it properly despite convenience culture's siren call, these aren't just health practices. They're existential statements about your relationship with yourself and your refusal to surrender prematurely to forces that would diminish you. The tragedy I witness repeatedly is men who've conquered professional challenges, raised families, weathered economic storms, only to be brought low, not by aging itself but by their refusal to adapt their self-care practices to their current reality. This isn't fate, it's choice. The environment you inhabit isn't neutral. It's either supporting your continued development or hastening your decline. This extends beyond mere aesthetics. The physical spaces you occupy become external manifestations of your internal order or chaos. Many men in their later years live surrounded by decades of accumulated objects, each one silently demanding attention, maintenance, and mental energy. This isn't trivial, it's existentially significant. I've observed men transformed by the simple act of systematically organizing their immediate environment, not discarding memories but creating intentional order that reduces cognitive burden. Your capacity for decision-making is finite and diminishes with age. Cluttered spaces force hundreds of micro-decisions, depleting cognitive resources better allocated to meaningful pursuits. Start with your bedroom, the place where you begin and end each day. Simplify it ruthlessly. Remove what doesn't serve function or bring genuine significance. This isn't minimalism for aesthetic purposes, it's strategic reduction of environmental chaos. Consider your daily movement patterns. Are there unnecessary obstacles, hazards that could precipitate a fall? The stairs you navigate, the shower you enter, the kitchen you use, These spaces weren't designed with your current body in mind. Modification isn't surrender, it's tactical adaptation to changing circumstances. Pride has no place in this calculation. The man who refuses to install grab bars because it signals vulnerability often ends up in far more dependent circumstances after a preventable fall. I'd be interested to know what space in your home creates the most stress or difficulty for you now. Share your challenge below, as naming it is the first step toward addressing it. Now, regarding social connections, this is where many men falter catastrophically. The isolated male is vulnerable not just to loneliness but to cognitive decline, immune system compromise, and increased mortality. The research is unequivocal, yet the typical pattern for men past 65 is progressive social contraction. Professional networks fade, friends die or become inaccessible, family members have their own demanding lives. This requires proactive intervention. Social connections at this stage don't materialize spontaneously. They must be deliberately cultivated, often against significant internal resistance. Start with consistency rather than depth. The weekly coffee group, the regular volunteer position, the recurring class, these provide structural frameworks for relationships to develop. Many men make the error of waiting for emotional closeness before committing to regular engagement. This inverts the natural order. Proximity and regularity precede meaningful connection. Digital communication has value but cannot replace physical presence. The neurological benefits of face-to-face interaction, the subtle nonverbal cues, the physiological co-regulation, these cannot be replicated through screens. This isn't technophobia, it's biological reality. Set a minimum weekly requirement for in-person social engagement, and treat it with the same seriousness you once treated professional obligations. The most tragic cases I encounter are men who postpone social investment until after retirement, only to discover that relationship building requires time, continued effort, and repeated engagement. There's no shortcut, and the longer you wait, the more challenging it becomes. This isn't meant to discourage but to emphasize urgency. Every social connection you establish now becomes an investment in your future functional capacity. Cognitive challenge isn't optional as you age. It's essential survival equipment. Your brain follows a brutally simple rule: what you don't use, you lose. The comfortable intellectual routines that have carried you for decades are insufficient to maintain neural plasticity in your later years. Yet I encounter resistance from men who believe their accumulated knowledge somehow protects them from cognitive decline. This is dangerously misguided. Learning must become deliberate rather than incidental. The brain that once absorbed information effortlessly now requires structured challenge. Choose something, anything, that forces genuine struggle. When you feel that resistance, that frustration of not immediately comprehending, you're precisely where you need to be. That's the signal that new neural pathways are forming. Too many men retreat from this discomfort, gravitating toward familiar intellectual territory. This is the cognitive equivalent of sitting in your favorite chair until your muscles atrophy. Language learning, mathematical puzzles, musical instruments, these aren't merely hobbies, they're cognitive weightlifting. The research is unambiguous. Complex mental challenges create cognitive reserve that delays dementia onset and preserves functional independence. This isn't abstract theory, it's practical neuroscience. Your brain requires novelty, complexity, and progressive difficulty. Without these elements, the architecture of your mind begins its inevitable contraction. I've found that men who approach this with the most success adopt a beginner's mindset. What new skill have you attempted to learn recently that pushed you completely outside your comfort zone? Share it below. Your example might inspire others still hesitating at the threshold of new learning. Now, regarding mortality, this is where our cultural poverty becomes most apparent. We've created a society that pathologically avoids what should be the most profound contemplation of later life. Your relationship with your finite existence isn't morbid, it's the ultimate clarifying force. Men who refuse to acknowledge their mortality waste precious time on trivial pursuits and petty grievances. This doesn't mean obsessing over death, but rather allowing its reality to sharpen your discernment about what truly matters. I've counseled men who, when facing their mortality honestly, suddenly gained crystal clarity about relationships needing repair, experiences still unclaimed, wisdom still unshared. The awareness of limited time becomes not a depressive force but a powerful filter removing the inessential. Start with practical matters. legal documents, advance directives, funeral arrangements. Handling these isn't pessimistic, it's profoundly responsible. It's the final gift of autonomy you offer to those who will survive you. But beyond these pragmatic considerations lies the deeper work, the existential reckoning that gives meaning to your remaining years. Ask yourself, what remains unfinished? What wisdom have you gained that hasn't been transmitted? What relationships need resolution? These aren't comfortable questions, but they're necessary ones. The tragedy I witness repeatedly is men who postponed this contemplation until illness forced it upon them, robbing them of the clarity and strength needed for completion. Mortality contemplation isn't separate from living fully, it's its prerequisite. The man who has made peace with his finite nature paradoxically becomes more capable of present moment engagement. The petty anxieties that consume so many minds are rendered insignificant against the backdrop of limited time. This isn't dark philosophy, it's the most practical psychology for your stage of life. Legacy creation transcends the simplistic notion of being remembered. It's not about ego preservation, it's about meaningful contribution that extends beyond your biological timeline. Many men approach this superficially, focusing on plaques and possessions rather than transmitted wisdom and values. This misses the profound opportunity of your current stage of life. Your accumulated experience represents solved problems, navigated challenges, and hard-won insights. This isn't trivial, it's essential knowledge that dies with you unless deliberately preserved and transmitted. Start documenting. Whether through writing, recorded conversations, or structured mentoring, begin articulating what you've learned about living well. Not platitudes or generic advice, but the specific wisdom that emerged from your particular journey. This process serves dual purposes. It provides value to others while simultaneously helping you integrate and find meaning in your own narrative. I've witnessed men discover profound insights about their own lives only when attempting to articulate lessons for others. The psychological benefits are as significant for the giver as for the receivers. Your story, properly understood and contextualized, becomes medicine for those still navigating challenges you've already overcome. Consider creating ethical wills alongside legal ones. These documents transmit values, not valuables, principles, not possessions. What do you wish you'd understood earlier? What relationships proved most consequential? What decisions do you now recognize as pivotal? These insights, properly preserved and contextualized, become navigational tools for generations you'll never meet. I'm curious, what single piece of wisdom would you most want to transmit to those who follow you? Share it below. Your insight might be precisely what another reader needs in this moment. Now, regarding shadow integration, this represents perhaps the most misunderstood yet essential psychological work of later life. Jung recognized that what remains unconscious doesn't dissolve, it directs. The parts of yourself you've denied, repressed, or never acknowledged don't disappear. They operate autonomously, often sabotaging your conscious intentions. Many men spend decades constructing personas based on strength, competence, and control. These adaptive strategies serve important functions but become increasingly costly with age. The energy required to maintain these facades depletes resources needed elsewhere. The man who cannot acknowledge vulnerability becomes isolated. The man who cannot express grief becomes bitter. The man who cannot recognize dependency needs creates unnecessary suffering for himself and others. Start with honest inventory. What emotions have you systematically avoided? What aspects of yourself have you denied to maintain your self-concept? This isn't abstract psychology, it's practical integration work. The shadow aspects you've denied haven't disappeared. They've been operating unacknowledged, often creating precisely the outcomes you most fear. This isn't about dramatic confession or personality reinvention. It's about expanding your self-definition to include what was previously rejected. The competitive drive you've disowned might manifest as constant criticism of others. The vulnerability you've denied might emerge as controlling behavior. The grief you've suppressed might present as inexplicable anger. The irony is profound: what you resist persists. The qualities most strenuously denied often control your behavior most powerfully. Integration requires courage, the willingness to acknowledge aspects of yourself that don't fit your preferred narrative. But the alternative is far costlier: continued unconscious behavior that undermines relationships and diminishes your capacity for genuine connection. The reward for this work is substantial: increased internal coherence, reduced psychological energy expenditure, and greater authenticity in your remaining years. The integrated man isn't perfect, he's whole. And wholeness, not perfection, is the realistic aim of psychological development in later life. The integration of these 8 practices creates something far greater than their sum, a comprehensive philosophy of aging with dignity and purpose. This isn't about isolated techniques, but about a fundamental reorientation toward this stage of life. Most men approach their later years reactively, responding to limitations as they arise rather than proactively establishing systems that preserve autonomy. This defensive posture inevitably leads to diminished capacity. The alternative requires strategic thinking, the same quality that likely served you well professionally now applied to the domain of personal development. Consider how these elements interlock. Physical discipline creates the energy needed for cognitive challenge. Environmental optimization reduces unnecessary stress. Social connections provide motivation and accountability. Mortality awareness sharpens priorities. Legacy work provides purpose. Shadow integration reduces wasted psychological energy. Implementation requires systematic approach. Begin with honest assessment. Where do you currently stand in each domain? Not compared to some idealized standard, but measured against your own potential. Identify the area with both significant need and realistic opportunity for improvement. This becomes your point of entry. Small, consistent changes in one domain create capacity for addressing others. The man who establishes a daily walking practice often discovers increased mental clarity for tackling environmental chaos. The man who simplifies his living space frequently finds emotional bandwidth for deeper relationships. Resistance is inevitable and should be anticipated rather than avoided. Your established patterns have neurological momentum. New behaviors require conscious override of automatic responses. When this resistance emerges, not if, but when, recognize it as biological rather than moral. Your brain preferentially preserves energy by maintaining existing patterns. This isn't weakness, it's neurological efficiency that must be consciously redirected. The most common implementation failure I observe is attempting comprehensive change rather than sequential improvement. Choose one domain, establish consistency before expanding. This isn't about dramatic transformation, but about incremental recalibration of your relationship with yourself and your environment. Paradoxically, this measured approach produces more substantial change than ambitious overhauls that collapse under their own weight. External accountability significantly increases success probability. This can be professional, a health coach, therapist, or personal trainer, or relational through group participation or partnership with peers facing similar challenges. The isolated man attempting significant behavior change fights not just inertia but also the absence of external verification. We are social creatures. Our behavior is powerfully shaped by community standards and expectations. The profound opportunity of this life stage is frequently obscured by cultural narratives of decline. Yes, certain capacities diminish. This is biological reality. But this same process can catalyze unprecedented psychological development if approached with intention rather than resignation. The qualities most essential for meaningful later life, wisdom, discernment, perspective, emotional regulation, often strengthen precisely as physical capacity changes. This reframing isn't optimistic delusion but psychological reality. The research consistently demonstrates that subjective well-being can increase during this period despite objective health challenges. This paradox reveals an essential truth. Your experience of aging is substantially determined not by circumstantial factors but by your relationship with those circumstances. The man who approaches limitation as challenge rather than defeat discovers capacities previously dormant. The ultimate question isn't how long you live but how well you inhabit each day you're given. This requires neither denial of reality nor surrender to decline but rather strategic adaptation that preserves what matters most: dignity, purpose, connection, and autonomy. The 8 practices outlined provide the framework. The implementation, the daily choice to engage rather than retreat, that responsibility remains uniquely yours. Self-care isn't self-indulgence. It's self-respect manifested through disciplined action. The choices before you aren't theoretical. They're profoundly consequential. Each day you either build capacity or surrender it. There is no neutral ground in aging. The chaos of neglect compounds silently until it announces itself through catastrophic dependence. But the order established through these practices creates a bulwark against unnecessary suffering, not against mortality that comes for us all, but against the premature dissolution of dignity and autonomy that need not be surrendered. Ask yourself, will you be the author of your remaining chapters or merely their passive witness? The difference isn't fate, it's choice, your choice, today.